What happens when the US, Canada's closest neighbor, starts flexing its dominance a little too hard? What if Washington's interests no longer align with Ottawa's values? In a world reshaped by trade wars, climate disputes, and shifting alliances, Canada is quietly finding out who its real friends are. And surprisingly, these 10 countries? They won't just stand with Canada, they might even stand against the US if it comes to that. Let's break down the countries willing to risk global tension for Canada and why their support matters now more than ever. Number 10, Denmark. Denmark doesn't make headlines often, but behind closed doors, it's one of Canada's most reliable geopolitical allies, especially when American pressure intensifies. Both nations sit at the crossroads of Arctic sovereignty, where climate change, energy routes, and defense interests are increasingly clashing with US ambitions. In fact, Denmark and Canada have a long-standing cooperation in the Arctic, even settling a decades-old territorial dispute peacefully, the exact opposite of how the US approaches regional tensions. But it's not just geography. Denmark has joined Canada in blocking US attempts to water down climate agreements, defend fossil fuel expansion, or control Arctic security policy. If push came to shove between Ottawa and Washington, Denmark wouldn't just back Canada diplomatically, it would lead a Nordic firewall against unilateral US moves. Quiet? Yes. Weak? Never. Denmark is one of Canada's most strategically important supporters, especially when the ice starts to crack. Number 9, Netherlands. The Netherlands doesn't get caught in emotion. It bets on stability, logic, and long-term partnerships, which is exactly why its bond with Canada is getting stronger as US unpredictability rises. When America's tariffs started hurting global supply chains, the Netherlands, Europe's shipping nerve center, sided with Canada on trade fairness and WTO reforms. And after multiple US administrations walked away from environmental and social agreements, Dutch leaders saw Canada as the last North American nation playing by the rules. Behind the scenes, Dutch and Canadian diplomats are synced on climate finance, data privacy, and countering authoritarian tech areas where Washington has either backtracked or imposed its will. Don't underestimate the Dutch. In a world where alliances shift fast, they're doubling down on Canada as the better bet in North America. The deeper we go, the more you realize this isn't just a video. It's a shift in how we see the world. So hit like, subscribe, and stay ahead of the curve. Number 8, Germany. Germany doesn't make loyalty pledges lightly. But over the past 5 years, Berlin has become one of Canada's most consistent and high-value backers, even when US pressure mounts. From defending Canadian trade rights in the EU to standing against US digital bullying of global companies, Germany and Canada are walking in lockstep. Chancellor Scholz, and now his successor, have praised Canada's stability and reliability as Europe re-evaluates just how much longer it can follow the US lead in global affairs. Canada's leadership in green energy, AI ethics, and peacekeeping makes it a natural partner for a Germany that's tired of US disruptions. And if Canada were ever pushed to choose between following Washington or leading on its own, Germany would be right there, saying, "Don't follow. Lead, and we'll follow you." Number 7, France. France doesn't play neutral. Especially not when it comes to protecting allies with shared values, and Canada ranks near the top of that list. For decades, Paris has backed Ottawa's international positions, even when they've directly clashed with US interests. Whether on digital taxes, NATO autonomy, or environmental protections, France often speaks loudly when Canada can't. When the US threatened economic retaliation over global tech regulation, it was France that aligned with Canada, framing the issue not just as taxation, but sovereignty. And in the age of rising authoritarianism and shifting alliances, France sees Canada as a voice of reason, a country not beholden to any single superpower. Make no mistake, if tensions between Canada and the US ever boiled over, France would be one of the first nations to say, "We stand with Ottawa." Not because it's convenient, but because it's principled. Number 6, Australia. If there's a country that mirrors Canada in almost every global debate, it's Australia. Both are former British colonies, both are rich in resources, and both are caught in the crossfire between China's rise and America's dominance. And that's exactly why Australia has quietly grown closer to Canada. When the US began forcing Pacific allies to choose sides in its rivalry with Beijing, Australia looked to Canada as a partner that understood the nuance, balancing trade, defense, and sovereignty without bending too far. They've also teamed up on climate policy, indigenous reconciliation frameworks, and tech governance areas where US leadership has often faltered or become hyperpartisan. If the US ever tried to punish Canada for stepping out of line, expect Australia to raise its voice and its hand. Not out of rebellion, but out of recognition that Canada's path is increasingly one that others want to follow. Every like, every sub, every comment, that's what fuels this channel and helps us beat the algorithm. If you're done with soft takes and ready for raw geopolitics, subscribe now. Number 5, United Kingdom. There was a time when the UK might have followed the US without question. That era is ending, and Canada is becoming the preferred North American partner. Post-Brexit, Britain needed new allies, reliable, values-driven, economically stable. And Canada fit the bill. Trade deals came fast. Defense partnerships deepened. Intelligence sharing, through the Five Eyes, remained intact, but more often shaped by Ottawa than Washington. British leaders have praised Canada's diplomacy at the UN, its leadership on human rights, and its ability to navigate between US-China tensions without compromising integrity. If the US tried to isolate Canada economically or politically, the UK wouldn't just resist, it would likely build new frameworks with Ottawa at the center. Because in this new world order, it's not about loyalty to power, it's about loyalty to principle. Number 4, Norway. Norway rarely grabs headlines. But when it does, it speaks with purpose, and increasingly, that voice echoes Canada's. Both countries are Arctic stakeholders, energy leaders, and staunch defenders of democratic norms. And when the US started pulling back from climate commitments and global diplomacy, Norway leaned toward Canada. Their cooperation on Arctic security, peacekeeping, and indigenous rights has created a quiet but powerful alliance, one that could form the northern backbone of resistance if US policy ever turned hostile toward Canadian autonomy. Norwegian officials have even suggested a future where Nordic-Canadian cooperation replaces US-led leadership in certain multilateral efforts. That's not a threat. It's a message: if America steps away, Norway's stepping in to stand with Canada. Number 3, South Korea. South Korea knows what it's like to live in the shadow of a superpower. And perhaps that's why its alliance with Canada has grown quieter, but stronger, especially as US influence fluctuates. Ottawa and Seoul have ramped up military cooperation, clean energy deals, semiconductor partnerships, and diplomatic coordination across the Indo-Pacific. And when the US attempted to monopolize chip supply chains or bully partners into decoupling from China, South Korea and Canada jointly pushed for sovereign resilience instead of submission. If tensions ever escalated between Canada and the US over trade or defense priorities, South Korea wouldn't take orders blindly. It would look at Canada as a partner with shared stakes, shared risks, and a shared future in the new multipolar world. Still watching? That means you're part of the 10% who actually think critically. Hit like to keep this content alive, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Trust me, it only gets bolder from here. Number 2, Spain. Spain doesn't always get top billing on the world stage, but it's often one of the first to step forward when values are under threat. And its relationship with Canada has deepened across climate initiatives, economic reforms, and multilateral diplomacy. Both countries have been champions of gender equality, renewable energy, and humanitarian aid, often in direct contrast to US rollbacks. Spanish leaders have even gone on record praising Canada's independence from great power games, a thinly veiled jab at Washington's growing unilateralism. If America ever tried to punish Canada for breaking from the fold, Spain wouldn't hesitate to defend it. Not with tanks or tweets, but with votes, diplomacy, and public alignment. Because in Madrid's eyes, Canada isn't just a friend, it's the model of what a modern, ethical democracy should look like. You won't believe who's next. Stick around and subscribe. Number 1, Sweden. Sweden might be small in size, but it punches above its weight in influence. It's no secret that Sweden and Canada have become the standard bearers of progressive global governance, from peacekeeping and tech regulation to climate leadership and feminist foreign policy. And while the US increasingly backs out of treaties, slashes funding to the UN, or wages economic warfare, Sweden sees Canada as the last stable pillar in North America. Both nations coordinate regularly on NATO reforms, Arctic strategy, and global human rights resolutions. And they share a mutual distrust of unchecked power, whether from Beijing, Moscow, or Washington. If Canada ever faced political or economic retaliation for standing its ground, Sweden wouldn't flinch. It would stand right beside Ottawa calmly, firmly, and without apology. Because in a fractured world, Sweden knows, Canada isn't just worth defending. Canada is leading the way. The world is changing, and Canada isn't waiting for US permission anymore. These 10 countries have made their choice. Will the US lose its grip? Or will Canada lead the next alliance? Like if you believe loyalty should be earned, not demanded. Subscribe for bold truths the mainstream won't touch. And tell us in the comments. Who would you trust more in a global crisis, Canada or the US?